Alright guys, in this video I'm going to show you how to tin a board as well as tin a soldering iron. Alright, tinning is very important. What it does, let me show you this first. This will be your first project right here. This is where we're going to practice soldering. It's just a printed circuit board design. On the bottom here you see we have all the tracks and pads, or in other words the pads are the circles where the components will stick through the board, and the tracks is what connects those things all together. So this would be the bottom of the board, and the top is just completely blank. You can kind of see through it and you can see what's on the bottom. But this is our printed circuit board. But it's really important to understand whenever you're soldering that it's really important to keep things clean. If you don't have a clean surface or a clean soldering iron, things aren't going to work. So this just came right out of the bag. It's really clean. A good way to keep it that way is to not put our hands all over it. Every time you touch that, our fingers are covered in oil. You know, whenever you put your finger on something, it leaves that fingerprint behind. That is a markup of our oil. So we don't want to do that. We want to kind of, whenever you're grabbing this, grab it by the edges. Don't be putting your fingers all over the different parts, because we won't be able to solder it as well. But not just do we want to keep the board clean, but we also want to make sure that we keep our soldering iron tip clean. So right now, if you look at this, it looks, if you look at the tip, it's kind of clean. The way you can tell if it's clean or not is if it's shiny or not. So right now you can see it's a little bit shinier than the rest of it, but it could definitely be cleaned some more. Otherwise the solder is not going to stick to it very well. So that's where this comes in right here. Let me get this out of the way real quick. We have our lead-free tinning flux. So what this does is this is made to clean things so that when we solder, things will join together very well. So if you look in here, it looks disgusting, like a container full of boogers or something like that. But what this allows us to do is it allows us to make a clean solder. So first thing, let me show you how to clean a tip. So first thing you can try, if it looks dirty, is you'll have that wet sponge that we had underneath each of our soldering iron holders. The first thing you should try is just by wiping this across right here. If the person before you did a good job of cleaning the tip, just doing this alone should help make it look a lot nicer. So if you already look, this is actually almost perfect on what we're looking for. It comes out to a lot nicer silver color. If that's not enough, what we can do after that then is we can dip it just a little bit into this lead-free tinning flux. So if you just stick it down into here a little bit, it will sizzle, make a little smoke, but it will allow it to clean it off really well. So if I stick it in here for just about 3 seconds or so, pull it out, that allowed it to get it really clean, take off all the extra residue, then we'll take it to our sponge again. And once you do that, if you can see now, this thing's looking perfect, right? It's very, very shiny, very, very clean. Okay, so we just completely cleaned off our tip. That's just what we're looking for. Now, let me bring the board back in here. The first thing we want to do before we put any of our different components in through all these little holes of the board is we want to tin the board. So right now this is just all copper sitting right here. Copper conducts electricity really well. It works great, but over time copper oxidizes. If you guys have ever seen like an old penny, it normally looks really grimy and kind of gross. That's because over time copper oxidizes and it kind of loses its clean sheen. So what we are going to do is tin this entire board, or in other words, cover it with a very, very thin layer of solder, which allows it to conduct electricity better and last longer, because it won't oxidize in the same way if it was just copper sitting there. So what we're going to do is we're going to use that same tinning flux that we used in this green container over here, and we're going to apply it I'll have you guys use a paintbrush so you don't have to stick your finger in it, because I just put it right on my finger, but I don't have a paintbrush with me. So what you guys are going to do is just smear it onto your board wherever there's copper. It doesn't matter if it touches parts that there's no copper, but you're going to want to cover it in a thin layer, kind of looking like what I'm doing right here, of this across wherever there is copper. So I'm not going to do the whole thing because this is just a demo, but when you guys do it, you would cover the whole board because we're going to want to tin the entire thing. So as you can see that there's a little thin layer of it, but once we do that, we're going to want to start applying just a little bit of solder. So right now I'm grabbing a piece of solder. I took it right off the spool, so it's about 6 inches long. And if I just grab this in my hand and kind of hold it like I would a pencil, I have it sitting right there, and then I have my soldering iron in my other hand. So what we're going to want to do is just put a little dab of it onto our tip, just a little bit. Alright, so you see there's that little puddle on it, and then we're going to flip this upside down so that the part that we just put it on is now going to be touching the board, and at a 45-degree angle slowly slide it across the part that we covered in the flux. And if you look, I am putting a nice silver sheen onto that. Alright, so just that little one single drop allowed me to do I'm still going, it allowed me to put this much of it covered in this amount of solder. So you don't want to put too much of the solder on here because it will put big puddles all over your board, and we don't want that. So you're just always going to want to put just a tiny little piece on here. So this eventually, I'm almost at the end where it's not going to work anymore. So if I go over here, it's probably not. Oh, it's still going strong. So like I said, you don't need much at all, but you'll be able to tell once it stops, because you will start touching stuff and it will not turn silver anymore. It will start to just scrape on it. So once you run out, that's where you want to go back to this. Before you do that, you'd want to take it to a sponge again, because you always want to keep it clean as possible. So get rid of all that extra stuff. So now we have a nice clean tip again, and we put just a little bit more solder on here. Flip it upside down again, and we can just continue to add solder to tin our entire board. So you would just keep doing this to cover the entire board. And once again, the point of us doing this is to make sure that the board doesn't oxidize, so that it will last longer, and because this allows it to look, I think it looks better, but yeah, it won't oxidize as well, and it will last longer over time. And I think it looks a lot nicer than the copper as well when you do a good job. So once you're done with that, you're going to put the iron down, you're going to make sure you clean it off and store it in its little holder. And then you're going to want to get some paper towels and wipe off all the extra residue. As you can see, there's still kind of some gross stuff all around here, and we're going to have to wipe that off physically, alright? We can't just let it sit there, because that conducts electricity and it would ruin the circuit if we just let it sit there. So the next step would be to wipe that all off with a paper towel.